summer, given how warm it is outside.
Welcome, folks. All right, not seeing any task force members in the other room. We'll keep an eye out. You are good, Sally. I was on another Zoom today and there was a barking dog, and I've also been there, so we will all manage. All right, I know that there are several more task members who are planning on joining. But given that it is 6:05 and we've certainly got a majority of folks, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. It has been like a month since we've been together as a whole group. It's just flown by, but it was good to see folks' faces. I know that it has, during that time, there's been a lot of work that has happened on this project. So it is not that we have stopped the work, but it's good to be back together. Let me just share my screen and talk through what tonight's agenda looks like. Oh, I hate it when it does that. It moves all you beautiful people, and I have to redo the window, which I'm going to do. There's probably a setting that I could use that make it not do that. Okay. So we are going to start out with just some updates on where we are in the process. We're going to get some updates about where things are with the short-term mechanism, the supplemental payments, with the budget process, which obviously intersects with our work in a big way, and then where we are with the final report. So we'll start there. And then task force members all got a preview of a few outstanding issues that we, in a couple of cases, haven't had a chance to talk about with the whole group because they came up over the course of the editing process. And I want to make sure that before we sign off on those, that everyone's on board. And then one specific issue that we have talked about, but there's some pretty strongly held feelings from a couple of task force members. And so again, want to just make sure that we feel confident in wherever we land. So we'll do that. There are a couple of short-ish sections in the report that are new as of today, and so people haven't had a chance to look at them. I don't believe that they'll be particularly controversial, but I want to make sure we take a little bit of time together looking at them. So that's around the updated implementation timeline that includes the long-term mechanism and some updates about the short-term mechanism. And then also the projected administrative costs. So again, we've updated that with new information about the short-term mechanism, but also the long-term mechanism. So we'll spend a little time on that. And then if we are ready to do so, we'll have some final discussion with any final statements that task force members want to make before we have a vote regarding approval of recommendations. We may or may not get to that point. We may decide that we just aren't quite there, but I will just be very transparent with all of you, which I have been, in our emails and in our conversations over the course of the last couple of weeks, that my hope is that we will get there today, for a bunch of reasons, some of which Raleigh will share a little bit about in terms of the budget timeline. And as we did last time, I would imagine that even if we are able to get to an approval vote, that we may identify a couple things that are contingent. So, contingent on making change X and change Y that, that we'd approve. So that's the goal for today. So with that, let's start with some updates. I will actually stop sharing so we can see each other, and start with, I'm going to toss it to Sarah to give some updates on where we are with the supplemental payments.
Yes, we are moving forward on the implementation for the supplemental payment. We have identified an entity that we believe will be capable of administering the program. That has a lot of features that we are excited about, including past experience working with some populations that are similar to our early childhood workforce in other states, including Spanish-speaking populations speaking a variety of other languages, populations that include undocumented workers and childcare workers specifically, again, in some other jurisdictions, not in the district, and has capacity to provide payment in a variety of mechanisms. I can't formally name the entity that we'll be working with tonight because we do still have to complete a formal grant award process for that entity, but I anticipate that grant will be awarded sometime in April, at which point in time we will begin moving forward as quickly as we can with that entity to stand up the platform and make sure that all the process flows for data to flow from us to them for validation by employees or employers as appropriate are laid out and supported by the platform, and to begin communicating more of those details to folks. We are already working to flesh out some of the business rules that will need to be in place, in order for everything to flow smoothly. And as we do that, we'll be able to share more information with people about what exactly the application process will look like and some of the more detailed kinds of eligibility questions in very specific scenarios that people have for us. I realize people are very eager for that information. I ask folks to please be patient just so that we can get all of those pieces worked out to communicate clearly. We are also in the process of posting some general information on our website so that people who come to it can find information about the Pay Equity Fund. And we're reviewing proposals from communications contractors to support us in a more extensive communication campaign, as well as working with our grantees to integrate information about the Pay Equity Fund into their planned activities over the late spring, summer, and fall as they engage different groups of early childhood educators through things like our DC LEAD program, which is the successor to Teach, through our CDA programs, and also through things like Capital Quality that are regularly, and the Shared Service Business Alliance and Quinn. So those are a variety of things that we're working on currently. We've identified some short-term staffing needs that we'll need to onboard in FY22 in order to support the implementation of this program. Right now, we're doing it with our existing staff. We anticipate that those roles would be able to eventually transition to supporting the long-term and benefit from the knowledge they would gain from supporting the short-term. When we are able to post those roles, I hope that we will have all of your support in recruiting really excellent and wonderful people for those roles. And also, obviously, as we are sharing updates and beginning to communicate more aggressively with various audiences, I hope that we will also have your partnership in getting those messages out to your networks and also identifying sort of vehicles or opportunities in work that you're doing where we may be able to connect with the target audiences for this work. That's sort of basically where we are on this. We're very excited to be moving forward. It will be a very quick process, but we want to make sure that we are getting all the systems right so that the experience folks have is supportive and works when we launch the system.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. And I got to say, this is exciting. All of the stuff that we've been talking about and thinking about, like there's steps happening. So I I get a little energy from that update.
Oh, one other thing I should mention, Abby, we are also in the process of making some updates to our existing data system that will streamline some of the things that need to happen for the distribution. We'll be sharing information on that with child development facilities probably in March, and there will be a set of things at that time that will start communicating with facilities that they can be doing to help ensure that their staff are able to receive funds and to help minimize potential challenges in the process for their staff. Those functions, I think, will also just in some other ways make things easier for facilities as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. And I know that, we are all eager to move things as fast as possible and get information out. It's obviously can't do everything at once, but really appreciate the fact that there's clearly forward movement towards our goal here. So Raleigh, I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of an update on where we are in the budget process. So obviously our work is very, very tightly tied to the council's budget process, and just want to get a sense of where things stand and kind of some timelines or things we should be aware of.
Sure. Thanks, Abby. So today the mayor has released her executive summary, which is volume 1 of the budget, as well as volume 5, which is the capital improvement plan. So we had a chance to review a little bit today after her presser, and nothing about the task force or pay parity was mentioned in the executive summary. However, we'll be able to see budget chapters throughout the week because I believe they're being released tomorrow and Friday. So with respect to a timeline, and I can put this in the chat, there's a great, all the attachments are on the CFO's website. Our budget office does a good job of doing a timeline for the LBA and BSA. So we hope to get these hearings as scheduled once we receive the budget. Right now, the COW public hearing, our budget oversight hearing is on March 28th, and then government witnesses will be on the 30th. So I'll also provide that link should anyone be interested in signing up as a public witness to support task force and make sure that your voices are heard. And I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions about LBA, BSA, timeline, hearings, procedural process?
You want to do just a quick definition of those acronyms, so folks who are not totally in the weeds on the budget just have a little more sense of what that means and why it matters.
For sure. So the LBA, which is the Local Budget Act, so this sets the minimum for local dollars that each agency can spend throughout the fiscal year. So the BSA, which is the Budget Support Act, this statutory languages and changes that are necessary to implement the budget and legal authority for specific revenue changes. So I can actually include all these links in the chat. I think they're actually very helpful in kind of getting a visualization of the timeline of what we're about to do. So hopefully everything will be buttoned up by May 24th is when the council convenes to vote on the final LBA and BSA, but there's going to be a lot of fun happenings in between then.
Excellent, thank you. So again, we'll make sure that task force members are all aware of the March budget hearing, because that's the next immediate opportunity in 12 days, I think, to be making sure that all the things that we've laid out in here get the kind of support that they need to keep moving forward. So thanks, Raleigh. Okay, so now on to update about where we are with our final report. So most task force members know most of this from all of your work over the past 10 days, but we over the last 10 days, task force members have given lots of great feedback and input to the draft recommendations. And I want to just thank everybody for the amount of time that you all have put in reading through all of this, providing clarifying language, strengthening language, and then in a few cases proposing a couple of things that that would sort of support our overall recommendations, but that we hadn't explicitly talked about before. And so those are some of the things we're going to talk about. And during that time, as task force members know, and so for the benefit of our viewing audience, task force members have had a chance to surface whether there's anything in the draft that I mean the language that I use that you can't live with, but that is fundamentally of a fundamental concern that would cause you to question whether you could support at least that recommendation, or something beyond that. With the idea that in our ideal world, as we talked about last time, in our ideal world, we have consensus recommendations and everybody in the task force signs off on all of them because it sends obviously a strong message. That said, there may be particular circumstances in which there's a particular recommendation that someone just does not feel in good conscience they can support. And in that case, what we've said is we would borrow from the approach that a number of other task forces in DC and probably elsewhere have done, which is that if someone does feel that way, they can note that in a written dissent as part of the report. To say, I overall support these recommendations, but here is this one that I don't support, and I want to be on record in explaining why. So I just wanted to name that as one possible avenue that where someone or more task force members might end up, and we'll see whether we're there or not. I also want to just ground us in a couple of big reminders as we launch into this conversation. So one is, this is indeed a big and exciting thing that we are a part of. And this report is an important inflection point in that work, for sure. So let's appreciate that. I mean, we've put a lot into it. There is incredible amount of thought and guidance, and we've wrestled with a lot of important issues. And I think it's a really strong document. At the same time, and we certainly hope that the recommendations that are in here are going to play a critical role in the trajectory of the pay equity fund. That's why we've all been engaging. At the same time, I want to just note that our report, all 50 plus pages of it, will not solve everything and will not answer or address every question. There is going to be a lot of work to be done. The moment this report is out of our hands, the next set of work begins. That will obviously include the work that ASI is doing, but will also include lots of ongoing conversations with people in this group and others to continue to figure out where we go. So I just want to remind ourselves of that, because I think that there can be this sense of like, if we don't figure it out at this stage, then all is lost. And there's going to be ongoing work. So want to just give ourselves that grace. So with that said, want to talk about the outstanding issues that I mentioned before. So there are three things that I want to talk about. Two of them are sort of related. So the first one, we have been talking along the way about how we want to think about private tuition and whether there's sort of equity related issues that we want to address with respect to that. Here, let me share my screen again. So as part of that, and I think it was initially a conversation with Sally. I can't remember who was with Sally, maybe Sarah, and then Taryn chimed in, a couple other people. So this came through a sort of conversation through the draft. But this first issue is, can people see this? And this is what you all had in your email. But this is the sort of context. This is language straight out of the report. Let me just give people a sec, actually, just to read. Are people good? Okay. So again, a number of you have already weighed in on this and signed on, but because we had not talked about this as a group, I thought it was something that we should bring back to the whole group, just to make sure that there weren't any concerns that, that we could address. And again, the idea here is that this would end up being an element of an equity adjustment, since we know that there are certain providers that basically are able to ask and get much higher tuition rates than others because of the communities they're serving, and we do want to make sure that we are targeting our funds in that way. This would not mean that those programs couldn't participate in the fund, and they they would still get base funding. And the details of exactly what this would look like would be, part of that ongoing conversation in terms of the equity adjustment. But wanted to just raise this. Any concerns from folks having looked at this? Okay, I think this is an easy one. So,
yeah, sorry, just before I respond, just clarity, because you're confusing me just now. Did you say this would not prevent or preclude anyone from participating? It's just like, I'm confused about that. Is it?
Yeah, it wouldn't
does it exclude programs? Is it a requirement? Is it part of the eligibility, or is it just a nice to have guidance?
Say your last thing again.
Is this an eligibility requirement for programs, or is it just a guidance from the PEF?
So, well, I guess I'm not sure what you're asking. So in terms of participating in the PEF, you anyone who meets any licensed provider can pursue it, right? And the base funding would be the base funding. In terms of considering an equity adjustment, essentially, and I think the way Sally termed this is like there's a potential of like a reverse equity adjustment, where we essentially sort of dock part of their funding if their private pay tuition is above a certain percentage of market rate.
Okay, so sorry. So potentially a program that has relatively high, for some reason, a percentage above the market rate, that program meeting all eligibility requirements can be accepted to be part of the PEF.
Yes.
If their market rate is above a certain threshold that gets identified, that in some ways count against them. Their funds they're going to receive from the PEF could be lower because they're above the equity adjustment funds. They could be okay. They could receive lower funding, lower than the base. Well, potentially.
I think potentially, because if they weren't otherwise, I mean, it's also possible that same place also has a lot of subsidy kids, theoretically. I mean, probably not. I mean, so I think, and I'm trying to think of like, in theory, you could be getting some equity adjustment up and down. I don't know that in practice that would ever happen. Sarah might have a better idea of that.
There may be programs that are in neighborhoods that have a high social vulnerability index, but because of varying factors, like they're very close to the edge of another area or something like that, might still enroll a population of families that doesn't necessarily reflect the exact geography they're technically located in, and could have very high tuition.
Yeah, so those are the kinds of specific details that we need to work out in sort of the particulars of the formula, but just the general concept. And I see Cynthia's got her hand raised too.
I guess I'm maybe still confused. I was good with Marika explaining her portion of it, but one of my concerns is being the level of control over a private program. If that program want to have their rates, whatever it is, they just don't have to get the increase of the pay equity fund.
Exactly.
I'm just a little confused about
No.
them slow to increase private tuition rates. I don't know what that looks like. And I don't want no one to be able to control a different business. If they're a private business, they should be able to have that level of controlling what their rates want to be. But I get the access to the fund. I think I'm just a little confused, like what their
100%.
access to the fund would look like.
Yeah, no, you're 100%, Cynthia. What this does not in any way keep a program from setting their rate. They can set their rate where they want and still participate in the fund. It just could mean that if there is, and frankly, I think this is good for you, Cynthia. Anyone else? Marika's still not sure.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your last comment.
I had to understand it first to know how to respond. So the first question I asked wasn't a reaction. It was just to make sure I'm really, really clear about what we're saying here.
Okay.
So the market rate will be based on the cost model, and that will determine how much a child development facility meets it pairs with the cost model, and if it, obviously, if they have high tuition rates, they have more funds and they can increase some of the pay, but will be a percentage, or the child development facilities will actually say, no, I don't want to participate because I don't want, but are they going to be required to pay if they have licensed the same salaries as the pay equity fund is suggesting they get?
So a couple things. So one, I want to dodge to some degree the specific details of how this will be implemented, because like the equity adjustment, I think there's a whole bunch of conversations that need to happen, and we're probably not the group to make that decision. The big picture, this does not change the big picture. You can decide if you want to opt in to the pay equity fund or not. If you do, if you do opt in, then you have to meet the pay standards, right? That's the sort of baseline condition if you opt in. All this does is it might mean that if you are a provider that frankly is able to get significantly more funds than your average provider through private tuition, then we would not be targeting as proportionally as many dollars to those folks as to providers that don't have access to those kinds of resources. So the idea is that it's an equity measure. It does not, again, it doesn't control what you do with your tuition. You can make a decision about where in that is a sweet spot. And if it's worth it to you to say, oh, I can pay my teachers this amount and lower my tuition rates, like, great, that's like a win-win all around, right? Individual facilities are going to have to make decisions about how that all plays out. All right. I want to try and move us along unless we've got some real concerns here, because we've got some other things that are frankly a lot stickier.
Okay.
So what in terms of what's in here?
I'm really uncomfortable. I mean, we can move on in the interest of time, and I guess we'll come back to it if we have an issue. It's too fuzzy for me, but I can park it until we get into other issues as well. Because
okay,
I hear your question about the granularity. We didn't get about the other pieces like the equity adjustment, but this one is a penalty. You know what I'm saying? So it's not kind of the same as the equity adjustment, because while the intent may be driven by some equity principle, the impact is a penalty.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, although it's a penalty on something that you can choose not to participate if it's not worth it to you. Different providers are going to get different levels of funds as part of the pay equity fund because of the way we're doing it, right? Like depending upon those various inputs. So that is going to happen regardless. It's another check on that. But if we can move on, and if this becomes something that for you, Marika, is like I'm going to fall on my sword on this one, we'll come back to it, but I'm worried about getting through some of the other issues. Is that okay? And I also would love if depending upon where other people are, and I know some of you have already expressed support for it, but if there's anyone else who's got concerns, if you can note that and we can circle back. Okay. So the next two are related, and this one I anticipate maybe stick here. I don't know. Let me give everyone a chance to read this paragraph. The last sentence of it is the piece that is a new expectation that would be put on child development facilities. So I want to that's the one to focus on. I will preview that the third issue that we're going to talk about is about the general concept of whether there should be discretion at the child development facility level for applying the experience scale. So we're going to get to that in a minute, but let's just assume that this first part is our current recommendation, and see if that last sentence is something people can agree to. So again, this would be an added requirement of child development facilities that they would need to document their pay schedule and the accompanying policies. So when I say accompanying policies, there's the numbers on the pay schedule, and then there are things like how many years of experience can you be credited when you first, when you are a new employee, what the rate, the sort of rate and pace of increases is, and what it depends on in terms of, evaluation or whatever else. So there's a set of policies that go with it. And they would be required to document those and share them. So the question that I have for the moment is, assuming that the first part of this is our recommendation, are you comfortable with that added requirement? We're then going to return to the question of whether people think there should be any discretion at the child development facility level. Okay, so Cynthia, I see your comment in the chat, worried about the requirement portion and what this would look like. Kathy.
Yes, so I have a question around the sample that ECE could potentially provide a sample pay scales that CTFs could use. Instead of it being a sample pay scale, could it be a suggested pay scale? and then folks could adjust within that suggested pay scale. And the only concern that I have, if it's not some sort of continuity along the system, then are we really creating a compensation system?
Hold off on that question for 1 second, Kathy, because
Okay.
it gets back to like the broader question around what the discretion level is. So I promise we're going to get there.
All right.
So, but given what is in here right now, is there, so Cynthia has raised a question about what this would look like and that it be required. I want to get other folks' input. Is this a recommendation that you would support adding this expectation, or is this something that you think should not be an expectation?
I guess I'm comfortable adding it, but I still have the sample issue that Kathy raised and then the requirement issue. That's just my two issues. Like what that requirement would look like because RC now has a lot of redundancy in paperwork. And if we adding more redundancy to the paperwork, we want things to be kept somewhere. So if it is a requirement that is provided, one time, that we only updated it sometime, but not all the time like we're constantly doing now. That's why I'm worried about the requirement issue.
Yep. Got it, Cynthia.
And also the fixed pay scale that I think we have more of a movable pay scale now. And I'm worried about a fixed pay scale being our sample to use if it's not based on the market rate.
So hold off on that second point, because again, we're going to get to that in a second. Other perspectives on is this a an additional expectation, the requirement to document and share that people can support or do support?
I think so. I mean, this is focused on an employer sharing the pay schedule and documenting policies with employees, which seems like a good practice all around, right?
Yeah. Same. Like in my mind, this sounds like you go into the break room and there's like the standard like OSHA sort of notice that's there, and I think it's in the spirit of what we're trying to achieve in terms of like being transparent. I'll put a period at the end of that sentence, and then we can take up whether it's a sample or recommended or whatever the language is. But I think that transparency is an important part of what we're doing.
Perfect. Thanks, Walrick. Rakaya.
I probably don't need to say it now that Walrick has said that so wonderfully. Yeah, I think it's really important for teachers to know what their employer is committing to paying them and why in a predictable way. So I think that's great. I hear the concerns about reporting requirements, and definitely I think it's important for us to keep that in mind in terms of implementation, but I think the general thought is right.
Okay. And I see Sally in the chat support. Kathy. All right. Is there anyone who
I support, but I think that we need to be also include the type of technical assistance that some of the smallest business will have with this requirement, because it seems that, we are talking about small businesses that now are required to really do big business work that might not have the same capacity to, to do some of these things.
Yeah, I think that's totally right, Christina. And I think we've been really clear in our recommendations of the importance of that kind of TA, and in fact, call out around this specific issue. So, well, there it is, available technical assistance. So yes, totally agree. Okay, so I think that what I'm hearing is that there's support for this. All right, and Marika's whipping out her NACE language. So we would get a thumbs up from NACE by including this, which is just an added bonus. Okay, so now let's get back to the broader issue that is, I know, connected to this. So thank you for your patience, Kathy and Cynthia and others. So the issue here, and I don't have the text because it's too long to fit on one slide, but it is on, I will give you all the page number if you want to be looking. But the basic, I'll stop sharing so I can find the page number. So we have obviously spent a lot of time as a group talking about the experience scale, and we've taken a couple of different directions on it and sort of looked at a couple of models and had we probably it's probably been it's probably been the most challenging piece that we've talked about. So we've returned to it a few times. Right now, what is in our recommendations is that and you saw that sort of overall picture in that paragraph, but is that there would be discretion at the child development facility level for applying the experience scale. So there would be minimum salaries that everyone is required to have. There would be sample, and I hear your suggestion, Kathy, about changing that language to suggested, which is a stronger is a step towards that continuity. And with this added piece that we just talked about, there'd be an expectation of transparency about scales, which presumably is that kind of transparency is always helpful in encouraging some consistency, in addition to market forces. But in our current version, there is not an expectation that that there is a sort of centralized lockstep pay scale per experience. So you have your role and your credential, and both of those obviously play in. You've all seen those charts a million times. And then where we are as of what's in the current draft is that there are these what are called sample in here, but open to other words there. There's some sample scales in the report that in all cases match sort of are tied to parity with DCPS at the teacher BA level, which is the place where our numbers can be exactly the same because the role and the credential are the same. So the top of that scale and the bottom of that scale, and then the steps in between. We smoothed out those steps in the samples that we have, as opposed to the kind of not totally smooth steps that DCPS has. We've talked about that. But there is in here, like there's a basic tenet that there is discretion within those parameters at the child development facility level. So I believe that what's in the report really does reflect where our task force discussions landed. But because there are a couple of task force members who feel particularly strongly about this, and because it's just a really sticky and important issue, I wanted to bring it back to the group to see whether there's anything we can do to make everybody feel comfortable with it, and if not, figure out where we land as a group, as a group sense, and therefore could allow people to make a decision about whether they want to dissent. So that was a lot of talking. Apologies for that. Kathy, do you want to kick off, since you started with the suggestion? I don't know if that gets us further towards consensus.
Yeah, I think what a sticking point for me is if we are building a equitable pay scale or pay system, and it's up to the discretion of the programs, it just worries me about this discontinuity across programs. That's number one. And number two, I think it just, and I guess also everybody knows I come from, a K-12 system. And in that K-12 system, it is very defined, the expectation, and that expectation that feeds into that annual increase each and every year. And to me, it's a little ambiguous when it is not a detailed salary scale. That is my biggest concern. However, for me, a compromise would be that there is autonomy at the CDF level, but instead of a sample scale, a suggested scale that promotes an increase each and every year. It's sort of system-wide or citywide. There's that expectation, it's also a lighter lift for programs to decide, how that salary scale would move along from year to year, considering experience and credential. And to me, it's a little bit more of a comfort level for me than for it to be, just, hey, there's this baseline salary and each program has, just some guidelines on how to decide how to pay, factoring in experience and credential. I'm just a little uncomfortable. It's just that I think programs should have to some degree some autonomy, but there should really be some suggestion around what those salary increases should look like each and every year.
Thanks, Kathy. So one question is, and I see Cynthia and Walrick. I don't know if those are hands from a previous moment, or Cynthia just took down. Walrick, you still got a hand up? No, okay. Sal.
No, I do still have a hand up.
Sorry, yeah, go for it.
Well, so just to make sure that I understand, the comment that was just made, or the suggestion around using the word suggested versus sample, just to be clear, it wouldn't prohibit or change the behavior necessarily, or like what a facility could do, but is it more just like having the language saying that this is suggested is a touch more, or it leans in a little bit more to push towards that predictable scale, as opposed to just saying this is a sample and it leaves it even more ambiguous? Is there something that I'm missing here? It doesn't actually, we're not trying to affect a different change within the recommendation, right? Is it more just like the language to try to make it a little less open to interpretation? Is that the idea?
I mean, that's my sense of what Kathy was saying.
I'm saying, to me, it shores it up a little bit on either side, instead of it being left up for interpretation about what that means. Because when you say base, that you're required to pay this base, and then these are these sample bands and so forth and so on. It's not definitive, and it doesn't really show an upward trajectory of pay that factors in the experience and the credential. That just kind of concerns me. And then also it just provides a bit more continuity, and it's a lighter lift for programs, because programs will have a sort of a blueprint on, or an already suggested salary scale on how educators can progress.
Yeah. Sally.
Hi. Yeah. So obviously, I have been one of those vocally opposed to the bans, and I still am, and I cannot support it. When rereading this draft again tonight, I reread our principles, and one of our first principles is ensuring accountability. Another one is prioritizing stability for staff and providers, that they can rely on increased wages and programs can effectively budget and plan. Minimize burden on programs, and center those furthest from opportunity and disrupt systemic inequities. And I think a band approach with, basically programs, allowed to do whatever they want within these bands, which is, how I read the language in the report. I think we move away from our principles that we stated clearly at the beginning of the draft and from the first draft. I think we move away from the Birth to 3 Act, which is where this task force was birthed from, trying to develop this compensation scale in parity with DCPS. If you want to talk about minimizing burden on programs, to just say, okay, here's salary bands, figure it out. And yes, there's TA, but with everything else programs have to do, to sit there and to try to figure out, well, what's my best, option towards a salary scale, that's just, ask any provider right now about how they're trying to figure out COVID guidelines. And, then add on salary guidelines. I think we're moving away from things that we stated ourselves in the draft, and I think from the, Birth to 3 Act. And, I will state I can't support a band approach, but I will not impede anything from getting this all moving forward, because I realize that today is like not the drop dead date. There's still going to be advocacy and things going on, but I can't support the band approach, even if the majority does support it.
Thanks, Sally. So I want to put out to the group here's where I think, well, okay, sorry, Marika, go ahead.
Sorry, just clarity. Looking at the document, so page 54 has a band. So does page 55. When we talk about band approach, what are we talking about? Just for clarity.
I assume that Sally's talking about the version that has the 5-year increments. So there are 2 versions in our document that are both sample scales. One is 16 steps for teachers and 10 for assistants, which mirrors the DCPS scale, and one is 3 5-year bands and 2 5-year bands. So I assume that Sally's talking about the second one. Is that right, Sally?
Yeah. I
page 55.
Like Kathy, I think the one that's in there that ECE developed in terms of, and I think it's a 2.86 increase every year based upon experience, and it follows fairly similarly what DCPS does. But yeah, the one where it's just blank in between, it's like 4 years, you can go anywhere between here, that I cannot support.
So go ahead, Marika.
Just to be clear, I feel like we have to be really specific here. I'm sorry. There's a lot of charts in this document. I want to be clear. So the band approach that we're considering removing is the sample illustration on 55.
So I believe that the question on the table, is, do we want in this document to say that child development facilities all must adhere to a common single salary scale and accompanying policies, or do we believe that there should be some discretion at the CDF level? And I think and tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, Sally, but from your perspective, you believe that having a single salary scale that everyone would need to adhere to in the same way in terms of applying experience is critical. Am I getting that right?
Yes.
So right now our draft says there are limits. Here's a floor. Here are samples of what progression along up to the top of that scale looks like, but that there would be the ability of facilities to make decisions within that context, based on whatever their particular objectives and situation are. So I don't want to relitigate like all of the reasons behind everything, because we've had a lot of those conversations. What I want to understand is, where is the group on this? So Sally has raised her very specific concerns. Kathy has raised her concerns, but offered a middle ground, or what feels like a step closer, I think, for her. Again, tell me if I'm misquoting you, Kathy. If there is broad support for moving either towards Kathy's middle ground or towards where Sally is, then I want to know that, so that we can shift what's in this draft. If there's not, then I think we're at the point of saying, if anyone fundamentally disagrees, that's something that they could call out in a dissent. So that's I think where we are. So if there
I hear you, Abigail. I don't want to derail the conversation. I think right now it feels like we're making comparisons and talking about options that I can't follow. So what are the options we're weighing? Can you be a little more concrete? We have a document, page 54 has bands, page 55 has bands, like what do we,
So,
what's the hybrid approach that Kathy's presenting?
I
it's not in
believe that, so what we have in the document is in the text on page maybe 30. Sad that I've like memorized the page numbers, but I could be wrong, where it says differentiation by experience. What we have is that there would be an expectation that that everyone meets the certain the minimum requirements by role and credential that are in there, that every child development facility would need to document a pay scale that shows how you progress along within their context, like what their policies are for a salary scale, and that OSSI would provide what in the current draft says sample pay scales and policies that presumably they would work with a bunch of stakeholders to develop, so everyone would have access to that. But that child development facilities could either adopt that wholesale, say, great, this is my policy and my pay scale, or they could say, well, we're going to do this a little differently in our context. So that's what's in the draft right now. What's on the table are two different things. One, moving from sample to suggested as one possible way to strengthen this in terms of trying to increase consistency, or two, moving to a single centralized scale that OSSI would put out and that all facilities would have to adhere to in terms of applying the experience piece.
And the option is if you don't follow it, then you don't participate or receive any funds from OSSI. You can just do your own thing. That's an option that.
Absolutely right. I mean, anyone for any of the conditions of this, if a child development facility says, yeah, it's not worth it to me, I don't want to follow that pay scale, they don't have to opt in, then they don't get the money, right? So yeah, none of this makes anybody join the program. So I want to, again, I felt like this was important enough and they were strongly had feelings enough that I wanted to bring it to the group, but I am not hearing a group shift. But I want to, I don't want to assume. So if there's anyone who feels like, yeah, actually, I think that what our current recommendations don't work, then, now's the time to raise that and see whether the group as a whole has shifted.
It's a little difficult for me just because it just means different things for different, programs. And I know that cannot be known or determined until it's rolled out, but how limited it will be for some of the child development facilities, whether they're homes or big centers.
And again, pardon for going too granular, it's kind of hard to discuss this in abstract. So just to be clear, the salary scale we have in here is uniform and rigid when it comes to the minimum salary for an educator based on role and credential. We're quite rigid about that. Right? It's really rigid. There's no if and buts. You have to pay at minimum to ensure the parity we're seeking. We're saying if you have this role and you have this credential, at minimum, you have to get this salary. So that's consistent across the board, across setting, everything. The fuzzy part is within that, certainly there should be a spectrum. How you move up beyond the base within that spectrum, how you move up and down of the spectrum, so to speak, should be based on experience and other factors that are important to the employer. And so, for example, I'm looking at the teacher one. the difference in the bands are literally $5,000. So whether you get 58,000, you will all get $48,000. I'm just using estimates here. The highest you can get is about 54. Between the 48 and 54, we're saying that decision, that's between you and your employer. Your employer will look at experience and other factors relevant to the context of the employer, relevant to the children's needs, to figure out where you get placed with that 5,000. So I think I just want to be clear, there is a lot of rigidity in it. It's where the rigidity is and where the autonomy lies. So for, again, to use a concrete example, for a teacher, that teacher gets the minimum, and that's across the board. There's no wavering. If you have this credential, if you have this role, you're going to get this. Now, you could get up to 5,000 more based on your experience and other, again, contextual factors, but that decision, we're allowing your employer to make that. And that to me sounds like parity with DCPS, because that's exactly what DCPS does.
So I want to, again, like we could go around in circles on this. Can I get folks to weigh in based on where we are now? Do you support what's in the document? Do you support a change from sample to suggested, which again would potentially kind of focus that recommended salary scale in a way, or do you think we need to move to eliminating the discretion that is currently in here? So yeah, Sarah.
I make a suggestion that might be clarifying and might help people make a decision on this. I feel like we're getting really tied up in the difference between bands and the schedule with the many steps. I wonder if a way that might be easier to think about it, given Kathy's suggestion of a suggested pay scale, would be, is this really less a decision between bands and the pay scale than it is a decision between a mandated pay scale that looks like the 16-step and 10 steps pay scales, or a suggested pay scale that looks like the 15 steps and 10 steps pay scales, but with clear guardrails that you must, for a teacher or for an assistant teacher at a given level of credentials, be within the bounds of that pay scale. And as an employer, you could make decisions to have fewer steps in that pay scale, or to have more steps in that pay scale, or to have the difference between different steps be different. But so that would, as opposed to saying we're deciding between bands and we're deciding between.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think, one of the things we could say is, like, right now what we have in here is that ECE would have samples. It has, multiple. We could say that ECE will, again, working with stakeholders, will develop one single recommended or sample or suggested scale, and still recognize that there you can then have discretion within that if there are reasons that a child development facility, but the mandated versus suggested, I think I appreciate that distinction, Sarah, because I think that's exactly what we're getting at, mandated versus suggested. So can I get people to weigh in here? Who is in support of the mandated? I'm assuming that Sally is raising a proverbial hand there.
I would prefer a mandated, but I can live with the suggested.
Okay. All right. Appreciate that middle ground, Kathy. All right. So does that mean that people are, I'm assuming that means that people are on board with the suggested?
Yes. I could support the suggested, as Sarah explained it.
Do we have a winner? All right, folks. The funny thing is that in the end, it's going to turn out that like everybody's like, oh yeah, we're all going to do the same thing, and we're going to be like, I can't believe we spent all this time discussing this, right? That may or may not happen. Okay, let's continue here. We've got, and thank you, Sally and Kathy, for both bringing your passion to this and your advocacy, and also for your willingness to really engage with the group on figuring out a middle ground. So I will make, that's one of the things that will be a contingent. So I will make those changes in the document, and at that point we'll ask folks, along with whatever other changes come out of tonight, to look at, make sure it reflects what we just said. Okay, we're going to switch gears here and go to two other pieces of content in the report. So one is implementation timeline and milestones that have been both updated from the first report, as things have, are actually now in play for the short-term mechanism, and then adding the elements for the long-term mechanism. So that's one. And then the second is the administrative costs, which again have been updated from the first, and then include the second. And what we're going to do here. So does everybody have does everybody have on their, right next to them here, their report link? Because probably the easiest way for people to do this is to look at the implementation timeline and milestones are on pages 35 and 36, and the administrative costs are on page 43 and 44. I can also, I see a lot of you in the document, but I can also project this for people for whom that's easier. All right, most of you, it looks like, are signing on. Is there anyone who needs me to project it on the screen? All right, so take a look at those. Can
we share on the screen for the attendees?
We certainly can. It's a little hard to see, so I will share it, but apologies for.
If you're an attendee, you might want to minimize our faces so that you can see the screen larger.
Okay, full screen. All right, so I'm going to do this for folks who are watching at home. I will just scroll down occasionally, so apologies.
Abigail, what page is this?
Okay, the implementation timing, I'm dropping in the chat, Cynthia. Implementation timing is pages 35 and 36, and then the administrative costs are pages 43 and 44. So I'm gonna do that right now. Oh, I was giving sorry, this is really what I should have been showing. Sorry, the timeline.
So unless it's marked short-term pay supplement, it's the long-term program, right?
Right, yeah, and apologies, I should have focused everyone in on the chart, the timeline, because that other stuff is all from the old report. So sorry that you just spent 5 minutes of your life reading the wrong thing. The chart is where you should focus. All right, for folks at home, I'm now moving to administrative costs.
I will say I'm not there yet.
That's cool.
Sorry, where'd you say the administrative costs? What page are they on?
43 and 44. And if folks have questions, you can actually just start dropping them in the chat before you lose them. Do people need another minute or?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. Are folks okay to start chatting about this? So thank you for dropping these questions in the chat, and people can add others. So we'll see what we can answer. And again, if people can, we want to get a sense of where you've got suggestions that are more like, oh, would like to, that are less sort of fundamental. We can always, add language or add that kind of thing, but want to make sure that we get at any kind of really substantive questions people have. So far, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Sally asked, can you clarify why the short term might go until the end of FY23? Do you want to take that one, Sarah, sort of given where things are?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of factors in consideration that lead us to believe that it is not going to be possible to launch the long term at the beginning of FY23, which would mean the short term would need to extend at least somewhere into 22. And a couple of those considerations are, first of all, there is substantial technology system development that needs to be built out in order to integrate the kinds of information the Pay Equity Fund Administration will need into our future state data system that needs to happen in order to put in place the functionality to issue payments to childcare providers that are not through our subsidy program directly or solely. And those things will take significant time, and we don't think they can be done well by the end of this fiscal year. The other reality is that the council has not actually enacted legislation or statutory changes formally creating the long-term solution. And there are also sort of a variety, as we've talked about in this conversation, of specific sort of implementation, like small p policies that need to be put in place to implement something such as what are the exact business rules for how we calculate the funding formula for a given program. And all of that needs to be translated into sort of guidance and information and materials for programs that are considering coming into the Pay Equity Fund. And those things will also take time to do. The other consideration is the onboarding and support for programs to join the Pay Equity Fund. There are certain things that are sort of unavoidable to have to do. For example, programs that aren't currently participating in the district subsidy system or receiving district funding in a specific way do need to go through a process that is not an OSSI process. It's actually a central district government process in order to be able to receive funds from DC government. There is going to need to be some kind of sort of written agreement or document, just like there is with any grant or funding program, sort of laying out what the expectations are, how the program will work, all those kinds of things that will need to be created, and then a process for providers to choose whether to participate in the program or not, and then to sort of actually sign that document and have that all be recorded formally in a system. And those all sound like simple things, but our experience with implementing similar things in the course of administering the subsidy program, in the course of the relief grants we've done for COVID, suggests that actually doing it in a way that equitably brings as many programs as possible on board does take time and it requires support. We also want to make sure that there is enough time for people to do planning for what this could mean for their budgets as well, once things like the funding formula are known, and helping people go through that process. So this is like a cautious and thoughtful timeline that we think is realistic, and we think builds in enough time to support providers to be set up for success and to be brought on board, including folks that maybe need more support or time to be brought on board, which is the thinking here. If the task force has grave concerns about that, obviously that is important to hear in this conversation. I also do not want to promise things that that go ahead of when the technology systems to implement them well will be in place.
Thanks, Sarah. And then another one that is also, I think, a Sarah question from Anne. Can we discuss that there is no TA money allocated for FY22?
Yes. And that, first of all, I want to be clear, that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't TA available in FY22. The way that we anticipate the partnership with the short-term, the grantee for the short-term solution will work includes some provision of TA that they will be doing as part of the way they approach the work. And there are also existing sort of OSSI funding streams, programs, and grants that can start providing some of this TA. I think I spoke earlier about our implementation process for the short term, thinking about how we would use sort of touch points that our grantees already have to communicate with the workforce and with programs. But that is also true with, we can use that to start getting information out to facilities about the long-term solution as more information becomes available. So just to clarify what that means and what that looks like. Yeah.
Great. So some of this is, where funds
I also
come
wanted to just remind folks, I know you know this, Anne, but for everybody that's listening, just to remind folks that FY22 ends at the end of September. So we are already basically halfway through the fiscal year. So we're not actually talking about a full year, but a shorter time period than that for all of these things.
And remembering that the numbers we're looking at here are from this particular funding source, which is not OSSI's obviously only funding source. Mm-hmm. Taryn, I understand there's not specific funding for program evaluation, but is there a way to build that into the timeline? So that is interesting. And I wonder whether, again, we've been explicit in here that we don't have funding for program evaluation. We'd like it, but I wonder whether there could be placeholders, like should there be funding, this would be a point at which it would make sense to, have the conversation about the initial like objectives of the evaluation, and data collection should start, some probably not super detailed, but a couple things like that. Is that what you're saying, Taryn?
Yeah, I just think without it, it might kind of go under the radar. And there's going to be periods where, once we pass that, if data aren't collected, we're just not going to have like the pre-program information to be able to answer some questions about whether it worked for certain, aspects. And so just thinking about like sensitive periods during which, information would be useful to collect for an evaluation, I think could highlight the need for this.
Yeah, I could see that. Does that worry anyone, or should we try to just identify a couple of spots in here to just basically flag like this is a critical point?
It might not have to go into the table per se, because I know that's pretty detailed, but just thinking about maybe going in the administrative costs, mentioning the need for funding for evaluation, but then separate, but then also in the timeline, maybe even in the text, just noting data would be hopefully collected before these programs or something.
So we know that, an evaluation, that we see evaluation as valuable for several reasons. We note that there isn't currently funds to support it, but to also make the note that if by the point of program launch for the long-term mechanism we have not gathered baseline data, it will be too late. So basically,
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Any concerns about adding something to that effect? It's just a flag to folks. Okay. Cynthia, all right, Rakaya says support. Thanks, Rakaya. Cynthia, can we discuss ECE increase in staff? And particularly looking at that FY23 to FY24, that shift. Do you want to speak to that, Sarah, of what drives that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. And I want to note that one of the reasons it looks that way is because there are ECE staff listed in both the short-term and the long-term, because we do need to bring on some staff now in order to support the short-term solution. We are seeking to hire about 4 people to do that, with the understanding that if we hire those people, they will then, based on that experience, be well equipped to potentially transition over to supporting the long-term implementation as well. So those are the folks that are listed in the short-term line. And then we assume that at some point in fiscal 23, as we are building out the system, we would start onboarding additional staff who would be needed for the long-term implementation, because the distribution of funding would move away from mostly flowing through an external intermediary to flowing from ECE to providers. There are just additional staff needed to carry out that work, including, we think it's really important that each program that's participating in this has an identified ECE staff member who would basically be like a case manager for a group of programs for navigating the Pay Equity Fund. And so that they have a designated point of contact that they can deal with, who will support them in all of this. And that requires ECE staff, as well as there are sort of budget and fiscal staff that are needed. Those staff need people to manage them and so forth. And we need communications capacity to support the program's success long-term as well. I think this is a total of about 10 staff that we're looking at here across when we get to the full implementation. And that's not including like me, who will obviously be very involved in all of the thinking on that, and other sort of senior leaders on our team and folks in our technology and our grants management and our operations units within OSSI who will all be supporting this, but aren't being charged to this and how we've fleshed it out.
Okay.
I'm sorry for this extremely random question, but Sarah, are you expecting this program to sit within an existing department of Dell, or I don't know what you guys call them, or division, or are you expecting this to be something separate? Or are you having to stand up?
We are expecting it to sit within the division of early learning, and we are still working through what exactly the best way to situate it to integrate well with our other programs. We have heard the feedback that folks have given us through this process and in many other venues that folks would like a more uniform and integrated experience of interacting with OSSI when they interact with multiple programs. And that is something that as a leader of that division that I am committed to working to do with the team and the staff. And so we want to make sure that however these additional staff are integrated into our team is done in a way that is really intentional about how this work interfaces with our licensing work, with our subsidy programs, and also with our quality improvement initiatives and our workforce initiatives, and being really intentional upfront about how we build those connections. So I can't answer that question fully right now, but it is very much on our mind as we think about this. And I want to be clear that we have heard loud and clear things that Sally and many other people have raised about how we can improve the sort of customer experience for child development facilities who we work with.
That is the questions in the chat. Does anyone else have any question or clarification around what is in the administrative cost section or the implementation timeline chart? And if people do have any, as you ponder this, if you have any specific things that come up over the next couple of days, obviously questions, but also things that you feel like, oh, we missed a really key thing that should be in there. We can obviously add that in, but just want to make sure that there's nothing that concerns folks. Okay, so when I'm taking this one specific thing that I'm taking from this conversation that we just had is adding the note around evaluation, just being clear that there is a shelf life on data and wanting to make sure that that is on the radar so that we don't miss that opportunity if there's a way to get resources to support it. Okay, so what I would like to do now is move to open the floor to task force members to make any final sort of statements, thoughts that you have around the recommendations in the report, and with the idea that we would move to vote regarding approval of the recommendations with the specific additions that we've talked about today, which include the one I just mentioned about noting the evaluation timeline, and then two around shifting the language to a suggested pay scale, to a single suggested pay scale coming out of that of the process with ASEAN stakeholders that would provide not only clear guidance, but an encouragement toward some consistency without requiring that as a condition of participation. So those are the two specific changes. The other thing that it sounds like there was still open was in the conversation around the high outlier tuition rates, and whether that could be a factor for adjusting down the payment. And I think Marika still had some concern about that. So if that's something that you want to raise in this portion, you can certainly do that, Marika, and see if we can get to further clarification. but want to give people a chance just to share where their heads are on this, and any final things you want to put out there before we move towards a vote about the recommendations. So I will open the floor to anyone who would like to speak.
I can go. I think what I really want to say is we're here because teachers advocated for themselves, and they showed up and told their story and what they needed. Teachers are, sort of a core function in our society, and I'm really excited that this work we're hitting a milestone in it that I think folks around the country are looking to, because it's something that we really should see reflected, in this work across the country. So I want to congratulate teachers who have informed this work and made it possible. You kind of have owned your story, and I think that's really exciting. And the other thing I want to say is there's a long way to go. And we have a lot to do in terms of making sure that funds stay protected and safe for our early educator compensation. We still have a lot of work to do on benefits, which we did not touch on in great detail in this task force, and implementation. That the details are key, and so implementation is going to be really important for this to happen. So I'm really excited, and I feel really honored to have had a role on this task force and contributed to this work, and kind of I hope I was able to represent kind of the perspectives of teachers who have shared them with our coalition in this work. So anyway, and I appreciate all of you who have been on this task force together. This has been this is going to be I think we're going to look back on this and feel really proud. And thanks, Abby, for leading this work as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to, second what Rakaya said. As I've been in this field, I guess I'll admit it on live camera, for about 36 years. It was a field that I didn't plan to go into or choose, and I always say that it chose me. And to be a part of this task force and to see the changes that we can make, I feel extremely proud. I feel honored to be a part of it. It gives me hope for all the current educators and for educators up and coming, that more people will choose this field rather than being chosen by it. It's, as Rakaya said, there are many, eyes on us looking to this. And I hope that we serve as a model for the nation to demonstrate that, the time of life in a child from 0 to 5, where the most brain development happens, those educators should be getting paid the optimum amount that they deserve. And then the children ultimately benefit and deserve this. So again, just thank you, Abigail, for leading this. And thank you to the council and the mayor for supporting this, and hopefully continued support. And again, just very honored to be a part of this group.
Anyone else want to chime in?
This is Cynthia. I think I can support. I just had to get my mind around Sally's and Kathy's recommendation. I can support Sally's recommendation. I just was more worried about the requirement. Sometimes when you just think of the word requirement, it freaks me out, because sometimes it's a lot of redundancy and it's overwhelming already on family childcare teachers. So I'm not trying to put a more of a stipulation on them, but I'm also a person who loves rules, so I most definitely follow them by the book. I'm a by the book person, but I'm happy mainly about being here with my peers and finally being recognized in a way that we exist, feeling a powerful voice, or being the voice for DC family childcare teachers and my peers. It's just a wonderful moment in time for all of us to even just be at a point that they're considering, us being equal across the board. That's just a really monumental moment for all of us. But I like all the recommendations everybody gave. I'm quite sure that we will be proud of what we put out, hopefully without regret in any kind of way. But that's it. I just wanted to make sure that I got to add in that I did support Sally's first comment and her input on that. I did. I just was worried about the requirement part. Thanks.
I just wanted to say I echo what has been said too, and it's been an honor to be a part of this. And I feel like we're getting closer to valuing early educators for the incredibly valuable work that they do, and should be compensated for, just like any other teacher in any other setting. We should value through money, right? What people do regardless of the specific setting and the ages at which they're teaching and working with. So I also, this is late, right? It's people have been doing this really important work for so long and not being valued enough. But we are on the cutting edge in DC. And so I do agree that people will be looking to us. And so I'm encouraged and optimistic and excited to see this go through. Thank you.
I'd just like to thank all of you. It's been wonderful to serve with you, and especially Abigail and Sarah. The lift that you've both done in this process is remarkable. And to Taryn's point about the teachers, but also as a parent and somebody who works in policy, that supporting teachers also means that we are giving children an even higher quality educational and upbringing experience in this setting and preparing them for school readiness and successful futures. And that's incredibly important work. And so it's been an honor and a joy serving with all of you.
I'll say pretty much the same thing everyone just said. It's been a really great experience to do this work in the district. As it was previously stated, this is really also about young children. When we create the conditions where early educators can thrive, we're also creating conditions for young children to be supported and young children to thrive. I think it's also important. I think the very first meeting, Abigail, you noted the legacy in the city. And in many ways, this is about the present moment. It's about the future, but it's also giving reference to the past and all those who have advocated for young children and for the early childhood profession prior to this moment. So looking backwards and paying honor, pouring libation, being excited about the present and as well as the future.
I'd just like to chime in too. Of course, I share sentiments with everybody here. And I also want to thank, besides Abigail, but I also want to thank our task force members for really pushing each other's thinking and thoughts and perspectives around what is best for teachers and ultimately children in this city and this system. And I just want to remind everyone, if you ever doubt what we've done is good and worthy, I encourage each of you to spend an afternoon in a 2-year-old classroom and be that teacher for the day. And you will realize how not only honorable this work is, but how daggone hard it is. And so I just want us to always keep in mind that, that our educators are the heart of the education system in the city, and that they have to be our highest priority. So thanks again to each and every one of you.
I will chime in as well and want to just echo so many of the sentiments that people have shared, including that the work's not over yet. But I think we can still celebrate because it's an important step. And we stand on the shoulders of so many people who have been advocating for this for a really long time and are still at it. And one of the things that I've really appreciated about this experience is a lot of those folks who I know and have been doing this forever are in this fight still. And there are lots of new faces of advocates, including many classroom teachers who have taken this on as advocacy work on top of what they're doing every day with children. And I just think that is really, really powerful. And again, a model for the nation. And then the other thing that I just want to remind us all of is, in addition to this being about, supporting the engine of the economy in ensuring that kids have places to thrive while their families are at work, and child development that we know is so incredibly critical. And as Sally talked about, the brain development that happens in those first few years, as all of us know, is in the fact that we don't invest in that is crazy. But the other piece of this that I just feel really important to note is most of the people that we're talking about who are these educators are women of color. And we know that this is a race equity issue. And we are taking great strides towards addressing what are legacy issues that are really significant. I have really enjoyed this work. As I've told several people, I feel like we can all sort of, we get our civic engagement cards punched several times for the amount of time that folks have put into this. And I know that it's a labor of love for all of us. I also have heard from a couple people that they thought I was getting paid. Let's be clear, folks, I'm not getting paid. But it really has been a wonderful experience to work with a group of people who are not only so passionate about this, but are willing to really push each other, as Kathy said, to think about the best ways to approach this work, and really wrestle with challenging issues and make tough decisions where we have to prioritize things. So a huge kudos to everybody in this group for all of that work. I want to make sure that if there's anyone else who wants to chime in, they have a chance to do that before we move to a formal approval.
I don't want to take a lot of airtime because everything I would say would echo what everybody else has said about what a tremendously important role our early childhood educators play, and how grateful I am that the district is positioned to once again lead the way in doing something really significant and meaningful to begin to move the ball on reflecting the value and critical importance of this work the way it deserves to be. I also really want to thank the task force for being willing to grapple with, we all share the same dreams for what we want for the early childhood workforce in the district, but figuring out how to get there is challenging. And I really appreciate having people willing to grapple with all the things that are complicated about how to get there. And I just have a request and a hope that as we move forward with implementation of this over time, that you all will continue to be good partners and support us at OSCE in this work. We need feedback, we need input, we need ongoing engagement, and we need help communicating with the various audiences that all of you represent. And I hope that you'll continue to help us in that way, and that we can all be good partners in this work. And I also want to note, there are like 30 teachers who have joined almost every one of these calls. And I have seen the same names in the attendee list so many times. And I just want to express so much gratitude to that. And for our interpreters, I know sometimes I in particular talk too fast. Thank you for bearing with us and making it possible for everybody who's joining to understand what we're saying. If it's not comprehensible, it's because we're saying ourselves badly, not because you guys are doing an amazing job. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I have learned a lot from everybody, and it's been a pleasure to be part of this group. I want to continue moving forward, supporting this, and really making sure that our teachers really get what they deserve. That's why we're all here. And obviously knowing that that will really benefit the children, but the equity part, and for the people who do the really important job that now is going to be compensated, is really a wonderful thought that is hopefully becoming a reality. So I'm here to continue to support this, and hopefully, everything runs smoothly. I know it's going to be hard, but thank you, everybody.
Thanks all. So let's move to a formal vote again. So what is on the table is approval of the current recommendations with the addition that I will run by everyone of shifting the language around the scale to a suggested single pay scale, and adding the note about evaluation. And if there is anything else that is just sort of picking at folks that you want to make sure that you think we need to shift some language, please reach out. And I would obviously want to run things back through everyone if it's anything that's fundamental. But if it's something more cosmetic, we can certainly make those changes. So with that, let me. And I saw Walrick. You raised your hand at some point. Did we miss you? Or are you good?
I was typing it in the chat, but basically like everything that's already been said as a parent with a 5-year-old and a 17-month-old that had a front row seat to seeing how much love and care and energy and passion their teachers pour into them day in and day out. And it's been an honor to be a part of this task force and in supporting those teachers in getting the compensation they very well deserve and have earned.
Thanks, Walrick. And I do see in the chat that Rakai has invited everybody to a party. So and Cynthia's there. So maybe we can actually see each other in person. So given what I just laid out in terms of what this approval vote would entail, all those in support of these, oh, I see. So on the tuition piece, I wonder, Cynthia or Marika, if you and I can have a conversation and see if we can chase down where this could end up, and run any revision by folks. And if not, then if there's if you want a dissenting view, obviously then you can express that as well. Does that work? Okay. All right. So all those in support of the recommendations with the caveats that I shared. All right, got some thumbs up. You can put up your Zoom hand or your real hand. And in the chat as well. All right, I think that is everybody. All right. So from here, we'll get those revisions out so that people can take one last look and make sure there's nothing that feels misrepresented. And then we will submit that to the mayor and the council as we did with the last version, and also then make it available to the public. Obviously, it's a very long document. So one of the things that will probably need to happen, relatively soon is starting to translate some of that into slightly more digestible versions. And then we will let folks on the task force know about the upcoming schedule for budget hearing and other related, events that we know people will want to be aware of. Any other next steps from your perspective, Raleigh, that we should share with folks?
I was just loving everyone's speech. I was off camera just enjoying that moment. So it's been a pleasure to work with each and every one of you. And of course, just copy paste what everyone said. And I'm excited to just changed the lives of many. This is a long time coming. And thank you, Abby. And thank you, Sarah. It's been, I don't think anyone, everyone realizes how important this work is, but I really appreciate Sarah being part of this because it's such a direct line to Aussie. And I, of course, have check-ins with Aussie every day, but the amount of respect that Aussie has for Sarah is wonderful. And I really appreciate all the work she's done to convey all of our messages at these meetings back to headquarters and get, 23 and going. So, and beyond. So thank you so much, Abby. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for everyone in the task force. Thank you all attendees. Thank you. Copy paste what everyone said. So next steps going forward, I put everything in the chat. I think it's a little bit scrolled up at this point, but if you want to take a second and scroll to the top, the budget timeline is there, the explanations of what the council is doing, all dates, and please let me put a plug in to please sign up to testify for our oversight hearing. We'd love to hear from all of you about anything. You have 3 minutes and we'd love to hear it.
Thanks, Raleigh.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much, Abby.
All right. I think that is it. I'm looking at the chat. Is there anything else? Anything else anyone needs to say?
The only thing I want to add is I also want to say thanks to the chairman for providing interpretation services. I think it's really important that folks were able to access this meeting and understand what was happening. And I hope it's a practice we can see spread across the council for everything that we do.
Hear, hear.
Thanks for Kaya.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your evening, all. And it's not quite over, so keep your eyes peeled for those last few emails before I am out of your hair. Thanks, Cynthia. Cynthia has a long